Welcome. So excited to have y'all here today. My name is Susannah Eastham, and I'm the Managing Director of Programs at Echoing Green. I'm delighted to be here with you, and I'm joining today's session as a moderator. And will help guide us through our time today. I won't be sharing as much about Echoing Green's impact measurement approach today because we are in the midst of a refresh on how we gather data on our 18-month fellowship and the fellowship support that we provide to our alumni for the life of their careers. Our goal is to end up with a light lift, leader-centered, trust-based approach that benefits fellows as much as Echoing Green. More on that in the months to come. So today we have 3 speakers with us, all of whom have extensive expertise and experience in measuring impact with a systems change lens. I'll kick it over to them to introduce themselves. If you could each please come off mute and share your name, role, and organization. Alexis, can you kick us off and then pass the mic? Thanks.
Hi there, I'm Alexis Smart with the Skoll Foundation. I'm a senior analyst with our evaluation and learning team. And I'll pass it to Shailja.
Hi, everyone. I'm Shailja from Dasra, working a lot on collaborative action. Happy to be here, and I will pass it off to David.
Hi, everybody. Great to be with you today. I'm David Bonbright from Ashoka, and looking forward to the conversation very much. I guess that's it. I could pass it back to you, Susannah.
Yes, indeed. Thanks, David. So thank you. All 3 of them will be sharing advanced strategies for measuring and driving systems level change. So today's focus is to share actionable tools to assess impact, integrate ongoing learning, and make data-driven decisions with systems change lenses. We've tailored today's session to share helpful resources and tools that we know many of you joining today are practitioners looking to deepen your approach to impact measurement and evaluation. So we have a lot to get through, and I'm excited to dive in. So with that, I'll kick it over to Shailja to get us started.
Thanks, Susannah. Hello, everyone. Let me just start with a really quick quote just to contextualize everything that we say. Talking about monitoring, evaluation, learning, assessment, one of the things that strikes me is that we're trying to get to what's worked and what's not. But this quote that I find profound is, uncertainty is an uncomfortable position, but certainty is an absurd one. And with that, let me start getting into the conversation. Next, please. Very quickly, what we're going to cover today is a very practitioner-led dialogue and sharing of what we learned as Dasra, an organization running an initiative called the 10 to 19 Adolescents Collaborative, working, like the name says, with adolescents across India in the age group of 10 to 19. But we worked in a multi-stakeholder, multi-funder, multi-organization, multi-government methodology. Given that, these are some of the things we've learned. Next, I'm going to go into some of our realizations, and retrospective vision is 2020, so a lot of this comes from our reflections and assessment post some of our learnings. One is, we realized that in a model that works at a multiplex level, like I said, across different stakeholders, looking at all the way from advocacy to implementation, population level changes, looking at regime changes, looking at ensuring looking at systems changes, driving resources, looking at multiple aspects across the different levels of implementation. We realize that our focus has to be what the problem is, and we don't need to be stuck in a way to say that this is the only solution. Ultimately, what is it that the monitoring, evaluation, learning methodology or approach helps us do? It helps us understand how we may do better in our programming. It's, at the end of the day, a learning loop. And so looking at ensuring that there are different levels of measures, that different measures for different levels has been a challenge. We also found that even though we had a group of funders who were committed to the same set of outcomes to do with adolescent health and well-being, each of them coming with mandates that they had from their boards or from their institutions. The organizations had to end up giving reports specific to each funder. In this case, Dasra, as a systems orchestrator, took a step in and said, we would consolidate this and make life easier for the implementing partners on the ground. But it remains a big issue where funders, because they need to follow the dollar, it becomes challenging for them to agree to just one standard formatting. While things are changing, there's a lot to be done. The other piece is that in terms of issues, when you talk about reproductive health, employability, education, while organizations are implementing in a particular issue, there are unintended impacts that happen across, and measuring all of it becomes complex, complicated, and expensive. Next, and that takes me to my next slide and the next piece, which is why, again, when you're talking about a multi-tier implementation, a multi-tier operational initiative, we usually end up measuring either policy change or population level change. What about the missing middle? And it's very, very important to keep stakeholders aligned, to measure if you're on the right track, to monitor that you're going as per plan or you're working towards the outcomes or outputs even, that you're going to look at measuring process. We all know this, but I can't stress enough how much it's important to measure process. It's important to measure output level data. It's important to measure both qualitative and quantitative information. And especially if you're talking about systems level change work, if you're talking about collaborative action, it's very important to measure all the way from, has the partner that you have been working fundraised more due to giving them more agency in speaking to the government, for example, right? These are some of the examples that it takes for us to measure, because in systems change work, ultimate progress is slow, it's staged, and at every stage, you might also have a different set of measures that you might have to change at a middling level. Next, please. The other piece that was very important to us over the years is to ensure that our measurement was participative. One is, often we got told by the young people that we worked with that, look, you measure, you come in, you do this research or you do some kind of measurement, the assessment is taken, it's shared with who knows where, and the loop is never finished or brought back to the community. So when you measure something, when you're researching in communities, especially in vulnerable communities, it is our duty and responsibility to go back, share the data with these communities from whom we've actually collected the data, as well as with their participation, make a plan as to how you're going to then look at making, working on those progress metrics, as well as ensuring that while you might have objective third-party assessment, you are also ensuring that there is community-based measures and participative measurement from the stakeholders that you are serving and communities that you are serving itself. This is often something that is ignored and left behind, and kind of, research agencies or measurement agencies come, collect the data, and then leave. The other thing I want to say is that in terms of participatory measures, again, I'm saying this to a lot of you who probably are very well aware of this, you can't use standardized or, foreign ways and mechanisms of measuring or monitoring. It has to be in a way that the localized community understands and is able to measure or is able to collect data. So you might also have to open yourself up to storytelling, picture monitoring, as well as visual and kind of map making, etc. That, again, a lot of us do. But just a caution to be to not, and if you can take me to the next slide, to not be hierarchical about it and to place one way of measuring better than the other. It's a holistic way of looking at how you may measure all ways and all forms and approaches, and different types of information comes in different ways. I guess this slide is slightly controversial or maybe provocative, let's say, but important to say that often we find that measurement, monitoring, learning, research, data collection, analysis, visualization, representation, translating it into compelling reports and one-pagers, etc., is an expensive exercise. There are few sets of organizations who have the wherewithal to have the funds to do it, as well as hire professionals and experts to do it, and can engage agencies to run it objectively altogether. And typically in a lot of grant funding that you get, it's highly programmatic, and then it leads to a negotiation to ask for monitoring, learning, evaluation budgets, and each of them are their own piece, right? So that's the one. And lastly, I will say is that the next slide is to ensure that we are looking at being practical and ensuring that we review on an ongoing basis. And the last slide, sorry, it's still one left, is to ensure that while we are collecting this information, the frameworks are shared back, public goods are created, failures are actually spoken about very openly and in a way that celebrates failures, so that each of us don't end up kind of reinventing the wheel, and we're able to leverage each other and learn from each other. I'll end here. Happy to answer some of the questions later. Thank you. I think I've run out of my time. Back to, sorry, was it Alexis I'm supposed to hand over to? Sorry.
Thank you, Shailja. That was a great presentation. So yeah, I'm going to be sharing a little bit about Skoll Foundation and our shift towards systems change measurement, and we'll get into some of the design elements that have driven our measurement system. You can go to the next slide. So just a bit about Skoll. So Skoll Foundation was founded in 1999 by Jeff Skoll, who was the first president of eBay. So he created the foundation to invest, connect, and champion social entrepreneurs and other social innovators driving solutions to the world's most pressing problems. So next slide. So for the first 20 years, we built out the Skoll 1.0 platform, which was really focused on advancing the field of entrepreneurship, investing, connecting, and celebrating social entrepreneurs all over the world. And we didn't have any issue-specific focus areas. And so by 2019, we decided to pull up and shift our strategy to one that was really focusing more on systems change. So we got feedback from our community of grantees in doing this, and we shifted our focus towards social innovators that are driving transformational social change around specific issue areas. So this is informed by our community and by our leadership. And to do this, we really broadened our investment strategy and started working with social innovators of all kinds within priority issue areas. It's just some of the context. The next slide. Yeah, so these are the 6 different issue areas that we focus in. I'm not going to read them all, but you'll hear some examples today from our health systems and pandemic prevention portfolio, and also from climate action. Next slide. So as our strategy evolved, so did our learning approach. So through deep consultation with our portfolio partners and our staff and our board, we developed these design principles to guide our learning. I'm not going to go over all of them in detail, but just want to share a couple highlights. So we really prioritize collaboration. So we learn alongside our portfolio partners to understand their impact in systems. And we also engage in mutual learning. So we invite our partners to evaluate us as a foundation and an actor in the broader system. We also strive to be adaptive. So we recognize that systems change is nonlinear and takes time. And so our approach has to give our partners space to take risks, adapt, and learn. And we also aim to be equitable. We center our portfolio and our partners and lean on them to define impact and corresponding progress indicators for their unique context. And we are really focused on our purpose to try to achieve, transformational systems change as our primary goal. So next slide. So drawing on these design principles, I wanted to further unpack 4 design elements within our learning approach for you all today. So I'm going to talk through each of these. So next slide. So the first point is that we track progress beyond the individual grant and look at constellations of impact. So again, this comes back to recognizing, systems change can't happen just by one organization. It's going to take a collective. And so we place emphasis on, we place less emphasis on evaluating the impact of individual organizations and more on understanding how constellations or groups of social innovators are working together to accelerate a shared agenda for systems change and collective action. So in practice, we have learning tools and reflection processes that help us to understand impact in multiple levels. So we start by, learning from our investments, defining with our partners system level outcomes and signals of progress at the beginning of a grant. And then annually, we pull up from what we're hearing and we're seeing, that they're sharing what's progress that's happening across our portfolio partners to understand systems level impact or impact at the impact pillar level. And then this informs our foundation strategy. So as part of this work, we track the ways our partners are working together to achieve systems level outcomes. So an example is on the right. This is a picture of our constellation of partners in our community health issue area that are working in various ways to scale and sustain country level community health across low and middle income countries. So one way they've defined to do this is to focus on professionalizing community health workers, which is a proven strategy for advancing health equity and health outcomes. So all of these partners are connected in this effort, and they're part of a larger global movement that's working to ensure that community health workers are paid, trained, supervised, and equipped nationally. So together, they've united with civil society, government, philanthropy to generate supporting evidence and research about professionalizing community health workers. They've contributed to pro-community health worker policies in 40 countries. They've helped to secure international, national, and private capital commitments for the community health workforce. So collectively at the systems level, they've been able to achieve a lot. So the next slide. So another design element is that we center how social innovators track and assess their progress. So in practice, we do this by working with our partners to understand at the beginning of a grant what impact looks like at the system levels from their perspective. And so those outcomes and signals of progress are defined. They inform our theory of change that we develop for each of our issue areas. So we call our theory of change framework our transformation journey. We have one for each issue area, and you can see an example of part of our transformation journey here on the slide for climate action. So in developing this transformation journey, we work with our social innovators to define this. And so one constellation of partners, for example, in climate action, they came up with a shared goal that they're all trying to reduce tropical deforestation in the Amazon, Indonesia, and the Congo Basin by supporting indigenous people as guardians of tropical forests. So we have several partners working across different geographies working on this goal. And other outcomes that they've defined, other conditions that they're working on to achieve this have been included in our transformation journey. So an example is we have one social innovator rights and resources initiative, which is a coalition. One of their goals is to double the legally recognized areas owned by or designated to indigenous people in focus countries by 2030. And so they're working to contribute to new laws and policies, to mobilize public and private donor funds to support indigenous community land rights. And they've strengthened coordination between indigenous-led organizations. So we've integrated similar outcomes that they're working on into what we're tracking at the systems level. This example also illustrates that to successfully support indigenous ownership or stewardship of land to stop deforestation, there are many system conditions that need to be in place, which brings me to the next slide. So we recognize that systems change is nonlinear and takes time and requires influencing emergent system conditions that can hold a problem in place. And so our approach to measuring systems change is shaped by FSG's The Water of Systems Change framework. So this framework highlights 3 levels of systems change, or 6 system conditions in total that can emerge and hold a problem in place. So there's structural, relational, and transformational changes. I'm going to define each of these in a minute, but a key takeaway from this framework is that changes in the system happen at all 3 levels, and that all 3 need to be addressed in order to really, shift a system. And we aim to invest in social innovators that are driving progress at all of these levels of change, and I can walk through here some examples. So structural change includes shifting policy, practice, resource flows. Shailja talked a little bit about this and how they're tracking that as well in their programming. So pulling up from our climate action example previously shared, we have in our transformation journey, an outcome that land tenure and carbon rights for Indigenous communities are secured and enforced. So this would be an example of policy level change or a structural change. We also want to see expanded access to financing for forest-dependent communities. So this is another example of shifting resource flows. So structural conditions are typically more explicit or visible within the system. They're easier to observe and therefore often easier to measure. So organizations might track their contributions towards increasing access to funding or information, or human resources, tracking how they're, improving or contributing to program or practice improvements, or how they've helped to draft or ensure that certain policies are passed or enforced. So those are structural change examples. The next one, relational change, includes shifting the quality of connections and communication among actors in a system, and also looks at the distribution of decision-making power and authority among groups. So coming back to our climate example, we have a relational outcome that we want to see stronger coordination across climate and nature forest focused organizations, so that, there's more communication, they're working together more frequently, they're able to advocate, work together towards certain goals. Those are types of things we would want to see. And related to power dynamics, we also want to see that the voices of Indigenous people are included, women and youth in particular, and they're elevated to decision-making and policy-making venues. So that would be an example of trying to shift power dynamics within those spaces. Relational changes are considered semi-explicit, so they may or may not be invisible within a system, and they may require more qualitative approaches to measure and track. So an organization might use feedback loops between different groups in a system to understand relationships and connections. And power mapping is also another tool. Network mapping, tracking the formation or engagement of formal networks or coalitions are examples of how a program or an initiative might look at how they're shifting relationships and power dynamics. The last one, transformational change or mental models, includes shifting deeply held beliefs and assumptions that influence how people think and what they do. So an example might be gender biases or racism can influence relational and structural changes in a system. So keeping with our climate example, if people don't believe climate change exists or have biases against Indigenous people and their leadership to protect forests, this can undermine other system conditions that we might be working towards. So mental models are considered implicit conditions. So they tend to be less visible, but they can have really big implications for other conditions, as I mentioned. So tracking mental models or narratives about a problem are important, but also can be harder to measure. So a first step is, understanding, what they are and why they're happening in a system. And so our partners have used such tools as research and public polling to try to really understand where people stand on certain issues, what their mental models might be, and where there might be entry points to shift those mental models. So an example is we have a Skoll awardee from this year, Illuminative. They're an Indigenous-led organization in the United States that is dedicated to building power for Native Americans and increasing their visibility. So to inform their strategy in 2017, they led the Reclaiming Native Truth Project. And over 2 years, they conducted a public opinion research initiative polling Americans about their perceptions of Native Americans. And their findings from this research provided evidence that the invisibility and the misconceptions about Native peoples in the US had created serious biases within institutions. And so they've used this research to inform their strategy and a number of activities to educate Americans and change public perception. So one example of something that came out of this research is a dedication to increase Native American representation in the media and entertainment, so movies and TV shows, and increasing the production of Native American stories and the use of Native American actors. So that's something that they've been working on. So just to sum up, changes in the system happen, when all of these three levels are addressed. And that these conditions for systems change is something that we've built into our learning approach and our investment strategy at Skoll. Next slide. So just the last design element that I'll share is that in figuring out how to track systems change across issue areas in our learning approach, it's meant that we've had to shift some of our own mental models about learning and evaluation as a foundation. So we previously emphasized outputs and quantitative and external methods and findings for our partners. And I would say those things are important, but we now, embrace a broader range. So not just emphasizing the quantitative, but also the qualitative and the quantitative. And Shailja also spoke to this, which I think is a key point, is looking at different methods that can help you to understand those systems conditions. And so that's the first, I think, mental shift we've had to make in moving in this direction. We've also moved from tracking shorter term year-over-year timeframes for impact to tracking impact across our issue areas over a longer time frame. So in our transformation journeys, we map out expected outcomes at a short-term level, what we might expect to see in 5 years, at the midterm level, what we'd expect to see in 5 to 10, and at the long-term level, 10 plus years. So this allows us to see if our partners are making headway in the short term, or if we are starting to see progress on higher order outcomes that may take longer to achieve. And the last point I'll make is that we lean into contribution versus attribution. So to understand how systems shift. So we recognize that social innovators practically are not always going to be able to claim attribution. So we've expanded our mindset to recognize the reality that there'll be more contribution than attribution in systems change work. So we support our partners and work with them to learn how they can best track their contribution towards, shifting systems conditions. So this, again, might be using other types of methods that are going to help them to be able to show how they're contributing to some of those conditions that I talked about before. So I'm going to stop there. And I think we're going to go into, I'll just to reiterate, these are the 4 points. Happy to speak to more of these and questions. And let's see, I think we're going to shift into a breakout room here.
Correct. On the next slide, it has the breakout room instructions. There you go.
Great. So I'll just set this up. So in small groups, we're going to take a moment to reflect on the 6 conditions of systems change. And so again, I think you can also think of them at those 3 levels too. So structural change, which again, policies, practices, resource flows, relational change, thinking about relationships and connections and power dynamics, and then mental models. So using the 6 conditions, we'd like you to share some examples of how your organization can shift relationships, power dynamics, and mindsets. So thinking about some of those sometimes harder to see, harder to measure conditions for you to think about how organizations might be able to shift those. So we'll let you go into breakout rooms, and we'll be joining you there as well. And how much time again do we have?
We'll have 10 minutes in the breakout rooms.
Welcome back, everyone. Thanks so much for taking that time to share in breakout groups. Love to have a few volunteers to share a highlight or a key takeaway from your group. You can use the raise the hand function to share. So please, can I have a volunteer to share from your group? What was a key takeaway or highlight? Also, feel free to just come right off mute.
I think in our group, hi everyone, Anna from Skoll Foundation. We just sort of talked about how people were digesting this framework and how different examples of work might fit in. So Cesar shared an example from Brazil of shifting sort of the openness of an ecosystem in a city to startups and how that involved bringing lots of different players from across government and private sector and innovators sort of into shared spaces. So kind of shifting power dynamics to create a shared strategy to enable startups that had some ripple results in that city and then spread elsewhere.
Wonderful. Thanks for sharing, Anna. Anyone else? Cliff, I see you off mute. Are you willing to share?
Sure. So in our group, we talked about 3 quite different examples with a similar theme. It was all about, you have to change how people think before you can change what they do. But then once you change what they do, there are other impacts down the road, right? So if you're training teachers to be better teachers, some of those teachers will then go on to help teachers in their own communities or disciplines or regions. If you're changing how farmers think, again, you're literally planting seeds that hopefully will grow beyond the individual people you touch. And then the third example was about, shifting from disposable to reusable sanitary pads, which, means your impact is greater and you're not producing more waste. So again, sort of these multiple levels of impact.
Great. Thanks so much, Cliff. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for those share outs from the groups. We're going to hand it over to David for the final presentation on regenerative measurement. Over to you, David.
Thanks, Susannah. Hello, everybody. And given that we've had 2 pretty detailed presentations, I'm going to go through my slides quickly, but really try to highlight maybe what are the logical implications of the directions that are indicated in the previous 2. And maybe if you move the slide forward. The reason I put Mr. Newton here is that this is William Blake's drawing at the beginning of the 1800s of Sir Isaac Newton. And to a large extent, the way we think and act when we do impact measurement and even aid funding is trapped still in a Newtonian paradigm. And what you've heard in the previous 2 presentations, thinking about worldviews and mental models, is to begin to move into a truly systemic paradigm. Next slide, please. And I want to just highlight how you can see this in a historical context. We have been a kind of modern, if you will, aid nonprofit sector has been evolving steadily since the 1960s and growing. And over the course of every decade or so, a new set of measurement norms and practices come into place. And it started off in the 60s where they looked at inputs, and then in the 70s they started to look at outputs, activities, bums on seats, as we say here in England. And then it moved in the 1980s to kind of cost-benefit analysis, where people were trying to relate inputs to outputs and understand the return on investment or the social return on investment. And then in the 90s, there was a big push that came into the field on kind of what are the actual results. If I do this, what's the result in the world? And this was the growth of an effort to try to find attributions rather than what Alexis was talking about, which is the move to contribution. And that was the rise of a lot of these evaluation methodologies that are looking at outcomes, including some really cool ones like outcome mapping. And then in the 2000s, the whole kind of impact investing world and the world of investors came into philanthropy, and we saw the approach of finance coming into this world on the one hand, and then in the world of nonprofits, mixed evaluation methods started to really develop. And I thought both Shailja's and Alexis' presentations were really thoughtful expositions of what mixed evaluation methods look like when you try to not only look in a linear way, but also look at a systemic way. And then finally, in from 2004 through to the 20s, and today we had what I call the beginnings of systems-oriented measurements, with the introduction of feedback loops and accountability models that are based on feedback from people in the system, learning loops, and understandings of beginnings to try to efforts of collective impact. And that theme there is starting to look hard at relationships, and you're going to hear words now that you've heard in the prior two presentations. I'm kind of creating a larger framework around them. And finally, now we're starting to look at what I call systems capabilities. Things like we ask the question, what are the capabilities in the system that determine the quality of interactions in the system? And the assumption here is that the quality of the interactions in the system are what really drive the results that we want. And Alexis used the word structural conditions, and I think that correlates very closely with what I mean by systems capabilities. Next slide, please. And so, so my view, and it's a hypothesis that we're testing now at Ashoka, is that it's really time to actually leap across the chasm. In a way, what we've been doing is trying to weave in systems thinking into Newtonian linear approaches. And my view is that we'll get further if we actually abandon the Newtonian kind of models and start to inhabit what's a fully systems mindset approach toward measurement would look like. And I have 4 reasons why we should do that. The first is that what we've been doing just hasn't worked. And I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole to explain all the reasons why, but I'll just say here that I don't know of any examples that actually live up to the promise of evidence-based fundraising and evidence-based management systems and decision-making and development processes, whether it's from funders or implementers. That's happened in anything like a scale and meaningful way. And it's really time to try something different. And the something different we should go after is post-Newtonian, complexity aware and power aware in the ways that Alexis was particularly talking about. And I think we need a model that really embeds measurement in management systems, and not just the systems within organizations, but across organizations at the ecosystem level. And most importantly, and this was a theme that Alexis hit quite strongly and rightly, we need a model that fosters collaboration for impact rather than competition for funding. Next slide, please. And so what you have to do if you're going to do this is think of a model of measuring that is inextricably linked to the way we do our funding. And what's happened historically is that we haven't connected those two things together in an inextricable way. So to really get it right, it has to be holistic, which means that the way we set goals, the way we measure, the way we share knowledge, which is the answer to the question, what's actually happening in the system? What are we learning from what's going on? And then how we fund are all part of a single piece of cloth that can't be taken apart. And that's the big, I think, design step that we have to make, which is the leap across the chasm. Next slide, please. And when you do that, and this doesn't really fully exist in the world yet, but this is what we want to begin to demonstrate and pilot over the next few years so that it can be an example that sits alongside all the really good, more incremental work that others are doing, that we can actually create examples of what it looks like once you get on the other side of the chasm. You have a process that has these steps, and it starts with some kind of goal setting process that's fully participative, inclusive, and deliberative, so that whoever the people are that are living around whatever the problem is, they come to some kind of consensus, whether it's through the tools of deliberative democracy or collective impact. There's lots of really cool tools out there that do this deliberative goal setting. But to use one of those tools, whether it's at the community level, you could do it at the level of a profession or a field. There's lots of different domains you could do it with. And then once you've got your agreed consensus about what the goals are, you then define the capabilities in organizations and systems and humans in order to realize those goals. So we focus right there and we define the capabilities. And then you create a funding protocol where you get all the funders that want to work on the problem to agree to honor the funding protocol, whether it's by setting up a separate fund to do it and then putting the money into the fund, or having people acting independently according to the conditions of the capabilities. But you get an agreement, a funding protocol in place to support the organizations that have the required capabilities. Then the other thing you need to do is, because we're not abandoning results, it's important to look at results in the world, critical in fact, is you create a separate research process that looks at how the problem is evolving in society. Whatever the harm is, whatever the issue is, you track it very thoroughly with the best research and the best methods are available. And you create a public dashboard which shares the information about how are we doing against this problem. So it's available to everyone at all times. This is how we're doing on the problem of gender-based violence and sexual harassment, for example. And then you have a process of independently certifying. Sorry, you got to go back to the last slide. I'm gonna finish on this slide that I was on, the previous one, yeah. You certify the organizations that are competing, that want to have the funding, that are applying to funding. You certify them, and every organization that meets the minimum level required for the capabilities is then funded. That's the orange circle. And then people proceed to implement, and then you do a process of learning and repetition, and the cycle continues, where over time, you are learning how the capabilities and the degree of capabilities that are sitting across the system are correlating to progress on the problem that you're trying to address. And the key thing to point out about the capabilities hierarchy is that you're building into your capabilities learning and collaboration as your preeminent capabilities. So every organization in the system is assessed on the extent to which it's learning and improving and collaborating with others. There's other capabilities that are really important on any problem, and they'll feature in the certification model and the capabilities domain set. But unlike our current model, where learning and collaboration is always up against the underlying competition for funding, this is wired in, and you only get the funding if you're collaborative, because the whole thing's been restructured in that way. Now, I'm not going to go into the how of certifying capabilities. I've got several slides on that, but I just can tell you I've spent the last few years working on this, and we have a really good methodology to do it. And the key to this is that it's not an expert-led model. The key to it, that's the slide that talks about it. It's got all these elements to it, and I'm not going to have. We don't have time now for me to work through all the elements in the model. But what I wanted to say is that the way we arrive at the capabilities is not from an expert, but if you see those two lightning bolts to the crowd there in the middle of the slide, it's about every person that is inside or outside or around the organization is providing its views of how the organization performs in relation to those capabilities. And then we crowdsource it, and we assemble all those perspectives, and that's how we know. So we don't know that the organization has the capabilities because it says it has them. We don't know it because an expert says it has them. We know it because the people that are inside it and outside it that see it every day says it has them. And we put that onto a maturity index and score it. And so that if you're above a certain score, then you qualify for the funding. And if you're below the score, you have to work on your capabilities. And when you've got that sorted out, you come back. So that's, I'm going to stop there. I know everyone's going to have a million questions about how you could possibly do this certification model, but there's a lot of science behind it. That's what these slides are going into. But I think in the interest of time and to help us catch up, I'm already kind of 2-3 minutes beyond the time that we wanted to start to move into the group panel discussion. So I'll pause here to say I'm happy to go into all this another time with people.
So thanks so much, David. We're going to head into a panel discussion with all of our panelists. And as we get everybody back up on the screen, David, I think I'll just start with you as a follow-up. Part of your theory of change at Ashoka includes organizing for change making. And you encourage breaking down silos, and you say everyone is a change maker. So can you share an example of how Ashoka has done this in practice? And what advice would you share for those who are just starting out, particularly emerging entrepreneurs who are looking to organize across groups and sectors?
Sure. And thank you for that. And I was trying to not be too Ashoka in my presentation and to really speak to the kind of structural, conceptual issues in the field. But of course, in the capabilities model that I was setting out, change-making capabilities sits at the very core, because we believe to be a successful citizen in the world, or the person in the world of the future, you'd better know how to operate in the world of increasing rates of change and to be a change maker yourself. So one, I'm just going to stay on the measurement theme. One thing we've done is we've created a self-diagnostic tool that anybody can take. I can drop the link to it into this chat, and it's 16 questions. This is called the Changemaker Index, and you can answer the questions, and then you immediately get a report that tells you where you are on the 4 dimensions of change-making capabilities and on the 4 subdimensions under each one. So we've made that freely available, and we disseminate it as part of every piece of work we do on the ground in the world, and encourage people to begin their own conversation with themselves about how they're doing on those capabilities. And so that's one, I think, very concrete example that specifically relates to measurement. And by the way, the #1 capability for change making is what we call conscious empathy. And Ashoka's #1 metric now is to create a world where every child leaves middle school having mastered empathy. And we think if we can achieve that, then it'll be a very different world. And so again, that's a mindset shift one. So it ties back to the big mindset, but the wide boundary view of empathy and making sure that it's a core part of the curriculum. And so we're working in school systems around the world to try to change the middle school curriculum to focus on empathy as a key capability.
Thanks so much, David. Shailja, this next question is for you. I noticed that part of your approach to your work at Dasra includes putting people first. So Echoing Green takes a similar approach to supporting social innovators, which we call leader first. How do you think about balancing taking a people first approach while at the same time making scalable change at a systems level?
I mean, I think even in our breakout room, some of that was really the discussion, and I can't say I have an answer, but this is something that we struggle with. Like I had mentioned also in my presentation, that, I think it's very important to ensure that not only are you balancing systems change work and measuring that, and people level outcome and measuring that, but at the end of the day, the change that we are making, the communities that we're serving, how do we take them along with us in the entire measurement system and sharing back with them, as well as building their capacity to take that forward onwards the next time, right? It's kind of a de-hierarchization of research, of data, of monitoring, of evaluation and learning. So that's really a lot of the philosophy that we do. I think the way we've done it is invested, for example, in running a campaign called Ab Meri Bari, which is Now It's My Turn, where girls from the communities, adolescent girls who we ultimately work with, a few champion girls supported by their not-for-profit organizations, designed a tool, implemented the tool and surveyed it in their communities, collected the data, analyzed the data, visualized the data, got together, pulled up 10 key recommendations, took that to the local, at a state level actually, authority, and then shared the recommendations. Sure, they were supported by a few organizations and facilitators, but the data was collected by them, for them, with them, and they made the change through them. And to be honest, the government listens to your constituent the most, more than anybody else. And that's really the power in ensuring that the people that we're working with are owners of data and the change makers using the data that they have. So that's just an example of the way we've done some of this.
Thanks so much. Alexis, the next question is for you. In your work at Skoll, you design feedback and learning systems. So when designing those systems, how do you elevate those working on the front lines of change?
So we do it in a couple of different ways. Like I think, a lot of this, that those on the front lines for us are really our partners. We really try to build a strong connection relationship with them. And so we're not just investing, but we're really trying to connect them and champion their work, and champion the people that their constituents and who they represent. So at a one-to-one level, our relationship managers are really, working deeply with them, building that trusting relationship and checking in, regularly to hear how they're doing, how progress is going, bringing that into the organization, but also looking for opportunities to connect and champion them in other convenings and spaces that we have and we help to coordinate in our broader network. So that's happening, I think, on a quarterly basis. We're also bringing, what are they seeing in the system? What are they hearing? What's changing? What are big key, inflections that might be happening that's becoming, a challenge to their work, or is a window of opportunity, something that's going to advance their work? So we want to hear about the system insights that they bring regularly, and we reflect on that internally on a quarterly basis. And then I think on a one-to-many level, we gather feedback from everyone in our community. And we do that, annually, again, through hearing about, how they're working towards the goals that they've set, what challenges they're facing, what system insights that they're bringing, and, having a chance to check in on that regularly. And then we give space as well. We use a tool called the Grantee Perception Report, where we're also getting feedback from them on us. It's anonymous on our relationship with them, and how we are in the system and how our partnership is advancing their work. And so that helps us to learn how we can improve these feedback systems with them over time.
Oh, that's wonderful to hear. Thanks, Alexis. So this last question is for everyone. So if you could pick only one thing from everything that you shared today and you heard today, what is one thing that you'd want everyone to take away from today's session? Shailja, we'll start with you.
Oh, very tough. I don't think it's one thing. I think I found camaraderie in hearing similar challenges across everyone. So it brings me at peace to say that, okay, we're in the same boat, and found a community and a peer network I can work with.
Awesome. And how about you, Alexis?
This is also a tough one. I mean, I do think in like taking on, trying to understand what's going on in the system, I really liked what Shailja said in terms of like prioritize the problem, like really think about the problem deeply and think about, everyone involved and really try to understand what's happening in the system, what some of those root causes are. So that would be, I think, a key takeaway that will help to sort of shape your work and then eventually shape, what you want to learn and what you want to measure. But you have to sort of ground it in sort of what's going on in the system, and really understand that deeply.
Great, thank you. And how about you, David?
Okay, so I'm going to do this. This is a really challenging one, I think, for the field and for me to reach the point where I can say this out loud. But honestly, I really don't believe we will solve the problems of impact measurement and learning in an effective way as long as the funders are all acting independently. We actually need, if we understand that it's all about collaboration, then people are going to have to put their money into a common pot and figure out some protocols. I honestly don't see any other way we're going to get there, and so that's a radical thought to put out there. But I don't see. Otherwise, we're just going to constantly fall short, because no one organization, no one set of funders is big enough. And so we really need to do this together, which means not just us implementers, but also the funders.
Oh, well, thank you to each of you for diving even deeper with us. You've shared a lot of valuable information today. So we're going to transition to some of those takeaways with a slide so everybody can kind of cement that in their brains a little bit. So we'll transition to that now before we head to the Catalyst 2030 team. So the key takeaways from today: systems change is nonlinear and it takes time. It really requires influencing emergent system conditions that can hold a problem in place. Another key takeaway is measuring systems change requires a mindset shift in our learning practice. Creating a public dashboard where all the actors in the group are sharing their impact will move towards systems level change. Shifting the deeper levels of systems is intensely challenging, and it is long-term work and requires a collective approach, as David was just talking about. And then impact measurement should be reviewed in the context of whole organization systems thinking. So I hope that this was a helpful session for you today to dive a little deeper on impact measurement. And with that, I'm going to hand it back over to the Catalyst 2030 team. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. Absolutely amazing, David, Shailja, and Alexis and Susannah. Thank you so much for joining us in this session. We do have a poll. Part of showcasing impact is we'll do a poll now, and it's on your screen. If you could take a few moments to share how the session was. We also like to do, you'll see another poll coming out in 6 months to see if you've learned from this session and are you using that information as well, so we can showcase that impact. As you're doing the poll, I encourage you to look at some of our other upcoming sessions that we're offering. We do have a session later this week on weaving systems change. And what we're learning with Catalyst 2030 is that this collective effort that David talks about, unless we're all working together on solving this problem, I love the idea of having a dashboard. We have to weave and work together in this collaboration. So there's a group of weavers that will be joining us. And I had not been familiar with that term until I joined Catalyst. So it'll be a really interesting session. We also have our Systems Change Learning Series, which wraps up our year of learning series. And in that, we have the theory of change and logic models as well. That will be coming up. As the Systems Change Learning, we have a Social Change Innovators online knowledge portal, which will put the information in the chat. And I put it in the chat as well that I'm going to ask David for his materials, and we'll share that on this platform. This platform has over 2,200 resources for social entrepreneurs. It was originally developed by academics who were using it in the classroom. So there's 12 teaching modules on teaching social entrepreneurship systems change. There's a module on impact measurement, and we keep trying to update that as we get new learnings from our Catalyst members. So you're able to go into that website and you can get impact measurement, latest updates and materials on that site. So we'd love for you to go there as well. If you've been a regular attendee for our learning series, we want your input. So we would love to have your input and feedback along the way. So you'll see another click in the chat for yet another poll. And we've also sent some emails out about that recently, but we'd love to have your overall impact of the learning series for 2024 as we're preparing for a 2025 launch of sessions and series. It's quite a lot of effort and time. Komi's been with us on the learning series for 9 months now, and it's really, really helpful. Here's some other information. If you're not a Catalyst member, to feel free to get that information in the chat. But this is the moment at the end of the session that we like to showcase our gratitude. So we can take that information off screen. Thank you again if you're doing the poll. But if you'd like to unmute and share your gratitude for our speakers today, we do have a couple of minutes. So if you have a last minute burning question you want to ask, or if you want to share your gratitude for the session today, we'd love to have you unmute and do that. Putting everyone on the spot. No worries. Well,
thank you, everyone. It was very,
thank you.
very enlightening. Yeah, loved all the presentations. Yeah, very insightful feedback that I can take back.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. I enjoyed the breakout prompt as well. It was exciting and insightful, and this whole session. Thank you so much.
Okay, Mudipe Adilawa. I just want to say thank you to all the presenters, and I really enjoyed, and I've learned a lot today. And I believe that many of us will take the innovation idea very seriously. Thank you so much. We are very grateful.
Thank you. And everyone can unmute and say goodbye in their native language to our speakers, and have a great morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where in the world you are.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank
Suda
you.
Hafiz.
Bye.
Bye. Bye, everyone.
Goodbye. Goodbye.